The way purpose works and psychological research has demonstrated is that it's out in front of us. Putting widgets in medical devices that save people's lives, to save people's lives, is an unfinishable purpose. If it becomes believed, it's always out in front of you. And that's why, I always say this, purpose pulls us forward. It inspires a sense of striving instead of constantly having to drive people. And it's that striving force of purpose, because it's focused on other human beings, that's especially powerful in organizations.
And probably whoever the founder is of the organization, at least initially, had some kind of a sense of purpose. Sometimes it's either lost in translation or it's lost in transition.
Welcome to the TalentGrow Show, where you can get actionable, results-oriented insight and advice on how to take your leadership, communication, and people skills to the next level and become the kind of leader people want to follow. And now, your host and leadership development strategist, Halelly Azulay.
Hey, welcome back, Talent Growers, to another episode of the TalentGrow Show. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow. And this week I have a guest named Zach Mercurio, and he and I talk about purpose at work and what he calls the invisible leader, why you should think about this sense of purpose as something that's really important to make sure you have that not only in yourself, but also on your team and in your workplace. And he shares some really specific ways to help identify it, to ensure that people are connected to it, why it is important, and what you can do exactly starting today to help you move to a more purpose-driven sense of work and also to become a more purpose-driven leader. So I know you'll enjoy this episode and looking forward to hearing what you thought of it. Here we go. Okay, here we are back with my guest, Zach Mercurio. He's a purpose and meaningful work consultant and researcher and author of The Invisible Leader, Transform Your Life, Work, and Organization with the Power of Authentic Purpose. Zach, welcome to the TalentGrow Show.
Thanks for having me, Halelly. I appreciate it.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm really excited to talk with you more about your book and your work. But before we go there, we always like to give people a little bit of a feel for your journey. So describe your professional journey for us very briefly. Where did you get started and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, I think for most of us who are in this space of really wanting to, this term rehumanize business in the workplace, it usually starts out of our own pain. And mine was the same way. In my first job out of college, I was an advertising sales executive for a radio station. They told me at my orientation that I sold air. And this, I know, exciting. And this group, this team, this job was really just miserable for me. And it wasn't because of the job. It was because of the results obsession, the obsession to acquire and achieve things, and the inability for me to have the skills to uncover meaningfulness and purpose in that work, and then for the team to do so as well. And I found very quickly that when a team lives by results, they die by results. And I was sort of quickly dying emotionally inside. And so that was the impetus. I ended up leaving that job. And I became obsessed with this idea of how do we make work cultures that aren't obsessed with just acquiring and achieving things, but help human beings to flourish and thrive. And so I actually went into higher education where I wanted to make sure that we were educating future leaders in organizations to have those skills to develop pathways to meaningfulness and purpose. I did a lot of training and development work. Then I started working around purpose and meaningfulness in organizations. And then I found a PhD program where I could research how people come to experience meaning and meaningfulness and purpose in their work and what are the effects of those. So that's just briefly about me. I mean, I've had 3 careers already, but the purpose has remained the same. It's really to help people thrive at work, to feel better about work and do better work.
Are you still in academia now?
I am doing both. So I'm an adjunct faculty and researcher at Colorado State University. And then I do consulting with organizations of all types and leaders of all types, helping to apply the research that I'm doing on meaningfulness and purpose to develop leaders who can create and design cultures that are centered on purpose and elicit meaningfulness for employees to achieve all of the positive outcomes that we all want.
Wow. Your book is called The Invisible Leader, which of course is an enticing kind of title. And
Yes.
I'm always interested in everything related to the word leader, but I have a feeling this is not what you mean. And, well, I don't have a feeling. I read your book, but it's not what you mean.
Yes.
Say more.
Right. So the invisible leader really is a common human-centered purpose. The reason for which an organization, a movement exists, apart from what it does, how it does it, or what it gets for what it does. So really, the invisible leader is the common purpose, not necessarily a person. And much of the research out there on motivation finds that one of the critical states of motivation and productivity is actually psychological meaningfulness that we mostly get from serving other people through a big purpose. And so that's what the invisible leader is. Some people say, oh, I've heard that in reference to politicians who don't show up to votes. That's not what that is. The invisible leader is really that a common purpose is really one of the most powerful leaders of our lives and organizations.
Yeah, I would call them a deadbeat leader if they don't show up.
Right.
Neat. So tell us more about why do you think that it is the most powerful aspect of the business? Like, why do you think that the sense of purpose or the clarity of purpose is what we should focus on?
Well, I'll give you an example, and it just happened a few months ago. I was working with some distribution center managers and supply chain managers for a big Fortune 500 supply company that really supplies electronic widgets to medical devices. They had a really bad financial quarter, and they were miserable. I mean, clearly, I went into this hotel ballroom and I'm in there. They're all sort of looking at their phones. I heard someone say, oh man, I hope this guy's not boring. And they just had that feeling of being broken as a team. And I stopped the session because it wasn't going well. And I just asked, hey, so why do your jobs exist? And, the supervisor in the back sort of glared at me for a second, but then one woman raised her hand, very slowly. And she said, I realized why our jobs existed last month. I was diagnosed with cancer. I was in an MRI machine that was diagnosing me. I looked up at the MRI machine brand and I realized that we distribute the widgets that go into that machine. And she said, I've been with this company for 12 years. I've been in this job for 12 years, and I realized that my job has existed all this time to save my own life. And you talk about an antidote to employee disengagement. All of a sudden, people in that room came alive. They started gravitating towards her. They were telling stories about their own work. They started brainstorming how they could get people on the front lines of their distribution centers connected to the work, all in a matter of a couple of minutes. And this is how the invisible leader, how purpose works. Like a lot of times when I share that story, people have like a visceral emotional reaction. That emotional reaction that we have to hearing a story about purpose is exactly how purpose works within us in the workplace every day. So they literally existed to distribute widgets that go into medical devices that save people's lives. Some people say to me, that's one perspective. That's the perspective. I mean, that's the only reason why the job exists. That purpose had been buried underneath the pressure to acquire and achieve results. And so they were not able to have that sense of motivation and unlock that source of motivation as effectively. So that's what I mean by how that purpose just can fuse people together. And that example shows it, and research has found that organizations that have a clear sense of purpose like that, they use shared language to communicate it. People believe in it. They outperform their peers by an average of 6-1. Purpose-driven brands have been shown to outperform the market by 15-1. But it's really a result of the emotional response that purpose elicits and the motivation that follows.
In your research, are you finding that there is a very broad or widely occurring lack of purpose in organizations?
Most people in organizations I find still subscribe to this really old belief that people are motivated primarily by acquiring and achieving things. And I found that we have a addiction almost to pushing people with things like, hey, if you achieve this goal, we'll give you this salary increase. Or if you achieve this quarterly goal, you'll get a promotion. And the problem with that is results push us, right? The problem with results is precisely the fact that we can achieve them. And then what? Well, we have to come up with another one. For example, when I'm working with sales managers, they tell me the most empty parts of their work lives are when they achieve a goal or when they don't achieve a goal. Because either way, they have to come up with something else. And this is often how we structure our organizations. And it's very expensive pushing for the organization. And it's also ineffective because the person, the people, the employees become dependent upon the push. The way purpose works, and psychological research has demonstrated, is that it's out in front of us. Putting widgets in medical devices that save people's lives, to save people's lives, is an unfinishable purpose. If it becomes believed, it's always out in front of you. And that's why, I always say this, purpose pulls us forward. It inspires a sense of striving instead of constantly having to drive people. And it's that striving force of purpose, because it's focused on other human beings, that's especially powerful in organizations.
And probably whoever the founder is of the organization, at least initially, had some kind of a sense of purpose. It's either lost in translation or it's lost in transition. So you either have it stop somewhere between the layers, between the top and then the mass of the people that are executing on the vision and the plan, or that over time and as the organization grows, it kind of loses the connection that maybe like a very small team, a small startup, usually is hyper connected to what got them started.
Yeah, and one of the things that I see in that, and I think you're exactly right, is the transition from thinking obsessively when you're founding a company of the human problem that your product or service exists to solve, and coming to know that problem, to starting to focus on the solutions and an over obsession with the solutions you offer. And what inevitably happens is people don't really care about what you do. They want to believe what you believe. It's that emotional commitment to why you're doing what you're doing. But oftentimes we get so lost in solutions, trying to keep up with the competition, trying to, innovate solutions, new products, new services, that we could actually drift really far from the human problem that we exist to solve in the first place, which is the ultimate value of an organization, and which inevitably is the ultimate legacy of an organization or a leader, is solving that problem or fulfilling that need.
And lots of the people that are listening are not really in the position to set the vision for the whole organization or to state what the purpose is for the whole organization. A lot of times they are the translators, they are the conveyors, but they also can set a purpose for themselves and their team, right? So how can leaders, especially leaders in the middle, create that kind of culture of significance that you advocate for?
I mean, one of the biggest barriers to working purposefully and achieving significance is that this unbelief that we matter, that our work matters. And I think that one of the key ways for leaders to really create a culture of significance and a connection between people and purpose is to cultivate the belief that the work matters. And one key way to do that is to make sure that the human being that's inevitably at the end of every supply and service chain on the planet becomes front and center in the everyday work narrative. There's a really interesting body of work by Adam Grant from the Wharton School, in which he researches university call center employees. These are high turnover, low morale employees. Basically they work at a university call center to call people to ask for more money when they've already spent money. And so what he did, all he did was have a beneficiary of the work, a scholarship recipient, come in and tell one shift for 5 minutes a story of how the work impacted them. The other shift he did nothing with. And what he found was that the people that heard that story just for 5 minutes ended up being 4 times more productive, bringing in 4 times more money and spending almost 3 times the amount of time on the phone. And so that study is one of many that demonstrates that we can do simple things like bringing an actual human being in to tell their story to our employees, being storytellers and story collectors. Often as managers or leaders, we get to see the data of the impact of the work. We often don't spend a lot of time prioritizing, translating that data into stories that we can tell people, especially people on the front line. And so making sure those stories are part of your everyday language, and then using the language of the big purpose, the big why the organization exists outside of what it does and how it does it. Using that language every day with employees can be incredibly powerful in setting that human-centered, purposeful narrative.
One of the things I know you are seeing in your work, because it's everywhere, and I'm in a similar line of work, it's everywhere. People love to frame this from a generational perspective. And I've had a guest who says that we unfairly label people, Jessica Kriegel, unfairly label, her about generations. But, that being the case, that the millennials or that the younger generation in the workplace is maybe even hyper-focused on having a sense of purpose, to the extent that they're sometimes unwilling or unable to stick to something that seems maybe not as fun, or maybe a little more removed from maybe something that seems, like it has a higher purpose to it. And so sometimes people, I think maybe the more sinister or skeptical among us, would say it's an obsession that is not healthy, with this, like, we must have a purpose for every single thing or else I'm not doing it. What do you think?
Yes, yeah. So, first, and research has really demonstrated that the search for purpose is a human trait. It's one of the uniting traits of our species. All you have to do is hang around with a toddler for a couple of hours to see that we're wired from the first time we learn language to make sense of our world, to ask why almost before almost anything else. We're wired to have an explanation, to have a sense of something that is bigger than ourselves, a justification, for the existence of whatever it is we're spending our time doing. We're just wired that way. And so I don't think it's a generational issue. I think it's a human issue. Now, you bring up the millennials, and I sort of don't subscribe to the labels either. Maybe it's because I'm like an in-betweener. I'm an 83er, so I'm like, they don't have a label for me. But I don't really subscribe to the labels. And one of the reasons why I think millennials and the younger generation is particularly interested in purpose is because there's a unique sense of collective empathy that I've been seeing in this generation that I've not seen in other generations in the workplace. And I think it has a lot to do with technology. A lot of people say that technology, for example, has been a bad thing for millennials. But when you think about it, they've grown up with the stories of human suffering from around the world in the palm of their hand. They see what people are going through every day in the palm of their hand. And I think that what happens is that there's this collective of, we want to do something about that. And I think that when organizations don't tap into that collective sense of empathy of wanting to do something, they not only miss out on an opportunity to engage millennials, but they miss out on an opportunity to engage and create a better environment for the whole workforce. Because while like a boomer may not say in the same language, I'm searching for purpose and meaning, in a 1955 study, 80% of workers said that they would continue to work if they won the lottery. And in 1955, millennials didn't exist.
Right.
And they said they wanted to work because it gave them a part of something bigger. So I think that millennials are highlighting it in different ways, but I think that it's really just a human desire and need.
I like that. That's a really good explanation, and I agree. We're going to start wrapping up pretty soon, and I'm going to encourage folks to do something very actionable that you're going to teach them to do or suggest. But before that, what's new and exciting in your horizon? What's got your attention these days, Zach?
What's got my attention right now is change again, and especially organizational culture change, because a lot of times what happens when I go in and work with organizations to make the shift to a purposeful mindset or a purposeful organizational design, what I found is one of the most powerful limitations of doing that is these unsaid limiting beliefs of the work. So I'm doing a lot of research right now and work on what beliefs are and how to change beliefs and unnamed assumptions. So the power of naming these beliefs that we have about work or about different generations or about other people can be so powerful in terms of changing them. So that's kind of the work that I'm doing now. I'm doing a lot of writing and researching on how do we change and name beliefs to change culture.
Is your thesis that once a belief is named, then you can change it? Or is the naming the thing to strive for?
I think once it's named, then you can figure out really what are ways to change it. When I say belief, I'm saying something that you can't name right now. It's just an underlying truth in an organization that hasn't even been uncovered yet. And so, getting people, especially in leadership roles, to really think about like what are the limiting beliefs of doing purpose work, for example. It could be that, oh, well, some work's just work and it's going to be work. That's a pervasive belief. And how do we change those things? Well, we have to name it and sort of get together and think about how we can address it and mitigate it.
Interesting. So can you give us just a little snippet of how do you research this thing?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been doing, especially with leadership teams and managers, is running these workshops where we simply seek to identify limiting beliefs and to name the core beliefs that are in place in the organization before applying any new behavior or any new strategy. And so one way to understand like what beliefs are, for example, is to actually have people write it out. I mean, I do a lot of narrative research, so having people write out what they wouldn't feel comfortable saying about what they think about a change initiative, for example, has been incredibly powerful. And then going back and reading that and then getting into a process where you start sharing it with other people. Because once a belief is read by another person, especially a colleague, it becomes real. And so that's one way of doing it, is through this, what's called narrative analysis, getting people to write it down.
Interesting. And can you give one example of a limiting belief that you've seen commonly held?
Yeah, one of the, I think I just did it, but one of the most common limiting beliefs, I think, for organizations is this idea that people work for a paycheck. Or, at the core, they may subscribe to this like purpose stuff in a branding capacity because it's alluring and stimulating. But when you get down to it, what I found is that leaders still have this belief that employees or their employees just want things. They want things, they want better pay, they want better benefits, they just keep wanting things. And that's one of the biggest limiting beliefs that I've seen that's most prominent, that's a barrier to change. Because if you think of your employees as, if you think of them as they, first of all, that word they is incredibly powerful because leaders are employees too. So that they thing is an indicator of a limiting belief. And then also that idea of they just want things, well, then you start seeing them as something to be manipulated versus inspired and empowered.
Very cool. Well, and I've seen so much research that shows that given options, many times people don't actually want more money. They do want things that give them a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning or give them an opportunity to build mastery in something and so forth. So especially 21st century workplaces, versus the industrial age.
Absolutely.
Yeah, neat. So what's one specific action that our listeners can take today, tomorrow, this week that can help them upgrade their own effectiveness as a leader, maybe a purpose-driven kind of leader?
Yeah, and I would say that purpose and being a purpose-driven leader, it starts as a mindset shift. It's changing how we think about even everyday work. I mean, one of the most powerful ways to start doing that is for, you yourself to identify one of those tasks, for example, that you just don't like doing. That's in your work, or one of those things that you have to honestly say to yourself, I don't like this. And what I would recommend is asking yourself 3 questions about that task. 1, if you didn't do it, what would happen to another human being, like another person, whether it's a colleague, someone in your organization, a customer, a user? What would happen? Paint that vivid picture, write it down. How does doing that task impact the person? Or a human being is the second question. And then the third is, how does that task help accomplish this bigger purpose, and actually using the language of a purpose? And now this is really powerful in changing your perceptions of a task. I was doing this for a group of bus drivers. And one of the bus drivers said, and they do very repetitive tasks all day long, said, even after hearing you speak, I still hate sweeping the bus, at the end of the day. And I said, well, what would happen if you didn't do it? And what he uncovered is that someone else would be inconvenienced and feel overwhelmed. And I asked him, well, do you like making people feel overwhelmed? Is that a value you hold in your life? And he was like, of course not. And he had this realization that who he had separated his values as a person from his values as a person in work. And he since told me that he can't think of that task differently. And so while it may seem forced at first, being able to attach a human being at the end of even your most mundane tasks will then help you do it for other people, especially when you get that pushback. But I'm just processing loans, or I'm just doing this task that doesn't have contact with clients. Meaning and purpose is crafted. It's not necessarily found.
And sometimes you have to connect the dots a little bit further than just writing, straight the next point.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
And help connect the dots for people. But I often say that if you're unable to connect the dots yourself and to think bigger and more purposefully yourself, it's really difficult to create and design a purposeful culture.
Oh, absolutely. That is for sure. It's very difficult to lead others and motivate others if you yourself are not motivated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Great. That is actionable. So let's think again to ask yourself those 3 questions. And then what should they do next? Like, okay, they ask the questions and then what?
And then I would continue the habit of thinking like that and crafting those tasks like that. And then, what I might do is think about maybe if your employees or people you work with on your team, if you find that there's people that struggle in a particular area of the work, or if a particular segment of your population struggles or is not as engaged in their work, see if you can help them and start teaching them these ways of crafting the perception of the work and bringing that human being at the forefront of it. Because it's at that point when multiple people adopt new habits that are rooted in purpose that those habits become a culture. And again, we know through a lot of research that when people are able to see that purpose of their work and create a ladder to that purpose from their individual tasks, they're actually more productive, more fulfilled, and happier, even if it's a little bit forced at first. That's how all habit building is.
And who wouldn't want happier people on their team?
Well, yes, I hope. Yeah, who wouldn't want happier people on their team?
Excellent. Well, Zach, thank you so much for spending time with us on the TalentGrow Show. We appreciate you. And how can people stay in touch with you and learn more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way is visiting my website at zachmercurio.com. And then I'm on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and LinkedIn at Zach Mercurio. And I post a lot of these tips. In fact, I do a monthly newsletter called The Spark. And at the end, there's always an exercise involved to take this and make it practical in your life and then in your team's life, like we did here today. So check out my website and follow me on social media and let me know what you thought of this episode. And I'd love to connect with you more on how to implement this stuff.
Excellent. Definitely. All right. Well, that's it for this show, for this episode. And thank you for your time, Zach.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, talent growers, even something as esoteric as purpose can be very actionable when you ask the right questions, right? So ask yourself those questions and take action, help others. My purpose is clear to me. I am definitely here to help as many people as possible maximize their potential and optimize their gifts. I hope that as many people as possible actually become the best self that they can be, and I'm doing my best to help them with that. And there's lots of ways I do that, by speaking to them about ideas that I have for doing better work, developing skills, becoming better leaders, and also by helping them in my many training and facilitated workshops and through this podcast, right? So, you can help me achieve my purpose because you can help me reach more people. the more people that I can help, the more that I can achieve my purpose. So if there's someone you think of that might benefit from this particular episode, and of course from the podcast in general, please share it with them in whatever way makes sense to you. And that way, all of us can help make this world better. And you can help me achieve my purpose, which I thank you for. So that's it for this episode. I hope that you'll take action, and I hope that you'll come back next week for another. I'm Halelly Azulay, your leadership development strategist here at TalentGrow. And until the next time, make today great.
Thanks for listening to the TalentGrow Show, where we help you develop your talent to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. For more information, visit talentgrow.com.